Welcome to this week's Money Metals podcast, helping gold and silver investors during these turbulent times. Now, this week's market wrap with commentary and analysis from Money Metals Exchange, the company named Best Overall Precious Metals Dealer by Investopedia.
Welcome to this week's Market Wrap podcast. I'm Mike Gleason. Coming up, we'll hear from J.P. Cortez, Executive Director of the Sound Money Defense League. Join Mike Meharry and his interview guest this week as they discuss the encouraging start for sound money policy during the early part of the 2025 state legislative sessions around the country. JP shares some of the recent strategies that have worked well and resulted in a lot of victories when it comes to both reestablishing gold and silver as money and eliminating taxes on precious metals all across the country at the state level. He also fills us in on what's going on nationally when it comes to the sound money movement, as well as some of the real concern that surrounds the country's gold at Fort Knox. So be sure to stick around for another great Money Metals interview this week with J.P. Cortez of the Sound Money Defense League, coming up after this week's market update. After reaching a new all-time high on Monday, gold is taking a breather as recent stock market weakness continued. Even after a healthy pullback of over 3% since the highs on Monday, the yellow metal is still trading well above its January close and remains in a bullish posture since its $300 up leg commenced in early December 2024. Short of a widespread and sustained liquidity event hitting major markets, gold should continue to have a tailwind, thanks to tariff and inflation concerns, weaker than expected economic numbers, and stock market volatility. With all these headlines about gold arbitrage and airlifts between London and New York, and most recently Fort Knox gold audits, the public is starting to notice what's been happening with gold prices. Gold still looks poised to push past $3,000 per ounce during its seasonally strong spring period, albeit maybe not just yet. For the week, gold is now down 3% to come in at $2,859 an ounce. This will end gold's remarkable streak of weekly gains at 8 weeks. Meanwhile, in silver, it too has taken it on the chin here the second half of the week. The white metal is off nearly $1.50 now since last Friday's close to come in at $31.24 an ounce, suffering a 4.3% weekly decline. As for the PGMs, both platinum and palladium are trading at exactly $958 each as of this Friday morning recording. That is resulting in a 3.1% weekly drop for platinum and a 4.8% decline for palladium. As you know, the Federal Reserve has put its interest rate cuts on pause due to sticky price inflation. The move makes sense, but why did the Fed start slashing interest rates in the first place? It was clear that the inflation monster wasn't dead when it surprised markets with a supersized rate cut last September. The Fed needed to cut rates because there is so much debt in the economy, incentivized by well over a decade of artificially low rates and money creation. In simplest terms, the economy is addicted to easy money, and it needed a fix. The Federal Reserve is in a catch-22. It simultaneously needs to cut rates to keep the bubble economy inflated and raise rates to keep the inflation dragon at bay. Right now, the central bank seems to be focused more on price inflation. However, high interest rates have consequences. This rise in mortgage costs has had a significant chilling effect on the housing market in the U.S. Sales of existing homes plunged 4.9% month-on-month in January and were only 2% higher than a year ago. To put it into some context, 2024 was the worst year for existing home sales since 1995. Compared to January 2021, home sales were down 36%. Wolf Street called it, quote, demand destruction, due to high prices that never came down after the inflation of the pandemic era coupled with high interest rates. The slowdown in housing sales has resulted in an inventory glut. The supply of unsold existing homes on the market jumped to 3.5 months in January. That was the highest level since January 2019. Meanwhile, active listings and the median number of days before a home sells rose to its highest level since January 2020. The fact of the matter is, buyers are reluctant to wade into a market with prices still high and mortgage rates above 7%. According to Redfin, 82.8% of homeowners have mortgage rates under 6%, creating a lock-in effect where they avoid selling if at all possible to avoid a higher rate. At the same time, serious mortgage payment delinquencies have actually exceeded the high levels seen during the 2008 housing collapse. But almost no one in the mainstream financial press is talking about it. We'll certainly continue to keep you posted on this unfolding situation here at Money Metals. But for now, without further delay, let's get right to this week's exclusive interview.
Greetings, I'm Mike Meharry, a reporter and analyst here at Money Metals, and I'm here today with my good friend JP Cortez. He is the director of the Sound Money Defense League. How are you doing, buddy?
Hey, Mike, good to be back. Thank you for having me on.
Hey, it's great to have you on. There's a lot of exciting things going on in the world of sound money advocacy. If we're speaking in English today. And so I'm excited to talk to you about some stuff that's going on. But before we dig into the nuts and bolts, I don't want to assume that everybody listening is familiar with the Sound Money Defense League. So if you can give the elevator pitch of what you're doing and what the organization does, that'd be great.
Absolutely. So like you mentioned, I'm the executive director of the Sound Money Defense League. We're a project primarily funded by Money Metals Exchange. We're a national public policy group leading the fight on the state and federal level to remonetize gold and silver. We've been doing this since 2014. We've found that primarily the best way to remonetize gold and silver is largely by removing the taxes that currently impede its use. There are currently a lot of disincentives and taxes and regulations that are imposed on the use or the sale or the purchase of precious metals. And so we go state to state and to Washington, D.C., introducing and ultimately passing legislation that makes it easier for people to use gold and silver as money or to invest and save in gold and silver if they choose on the individual level. And then, of course, we've been working on legislation, for example, to build state reserves of physical gold, legislation to reaffirm legal tender status for gold and silver, and so on and so forth. This is year 11 for us now. Last year was our most legislatively productive year that we've ever had. 7 states passed, signed into law, sound money legislation last year. And this year, we're off to a very hot start.
Yeah, it's exciting. Some folks know that I work with the 10th Amendment Center as well, and we do a lot of state level policy, and so we're tracking a lot of these bills as well as you, and I really noticed an uptick over the last 2 years of the amount of legislation that's been introduced across the country. So there's a growing interest in this, and I guess some of that is probably due to it's gotten impossible for the government to hide the inflationary policies and the impact of monetary debasement. And really, this is fundamentally about currency competition, right? If you give people the opportunity to use and have sound money, it can kind of undermine the federal monopoly and the degradation of our money that we have, right?
And that's such an important point, because the truth is, Mike, no one chose the U.S. dollar. No one woke up this morning and said, I want to transact in U.S. Federal Reserve notes because they have the properties that I want my money to have. No one said that. And the reason is largely because no one had that choice. Everything else that could functionally or alternatively be used as money has been saddled with taxes and all of these other disincentives. So you don't really have another option. We're trapped right now.
Yeah.
So to break free out of the monetary monopoly, a Nobel Prize winning economist F.A. Hayek talks about how money was captured in its most primitive state. The government established a monopoly on it, and since then we've seen a slow degradation of what money could be. So to reintroduce and to reestablish gold and silver, to reintegrate those back into the monetary system would be profound, right? The money we have today is largely based on debt and credit. This is deficit spending. It's printing of money. It's living on behalf of our progeny. Our future generations are ultimately going to have to pay this. And none of us chose a policy of inflation. None of us got to vote on whether or not our dollars would be inflated away. So we need, then, knowing what we know about the monetary monopoly that the United States government has on the United States and the world, we need to find a clever workaround. And what we have found at the state level, one, it's that doing it at the state level is what's important. You can call your congressman and they may or may not get back to you. An aide may or may not answer your call or your email. But in Nashville, Tennessee, or in Lincoln, Nebraska, or Salem, Oregon, Boise, Idaho, those are the places where your voice has real power. So encouraging everyone to do it at the state level and to be an active participant. But also, we have found historically, policy trickles upward.
Yes.
Policy starts at the state. And of course, the incredible work that you and the 10th Amendment Center are doing, I'm sure you could speak to a million stories of this. Policy happens on the federal level when enough states do something, and that gets the federal level's attention. Yeah. But so the battlefield then we have to understand is at the state level, passing this legislation to remove taxes on the metals, to make it easier for dealers to transact in a state, to make it easier for state treasurers to bolster their state funds with physical gold. All of this has to be done legislatively, mostly at the state level. And that's why I'm happy to say we're having, such a big impact, having done this for more than a decade. Like you said, more than 10 years ago, when we started this, there were very few state legislatures that were considering sound money legislation like this. Mm-hmm. This past year, it was more than 27 states that had introduced more than 65 pieces of legislation. So it's an entire sea change from where we were just 10 years ago.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I'm really glad you brought up that kind of strategic point, because that's so important for people to understand, because I think there's a lot of cynicism and kind of almost this negative view that I can't change anything, because they've had that experience, right? They've called their congressman, they talked to the intern, they got the email back that had nothing to do with anything that they said. They feel like they're just banging their heads against a wall. And yet we really can have impact at the state level. And I use this anecdote often. I talked to a state rep in Kentucky, and this was a number of years ago, but it's still true today. And he told me he would go through entire legislative sessions and never have a constituent contact him about a specific piece of legislation. So when you motivate people and use the grassroots to push these bills and to call state representatives and state senators, it makes a difference. 30 or 40 phone calls is like huge in their minds, So I'm
Absolutely. There are hundreds, if not thousands of bills every single year that get introduced that are not even remotely considered. They do not receive a hearing. There is not an ounce of consideration given to thousands of bills throughout the country that just are printed on a piece of paper and then never thought about again. Yeah. So being a participant, sending the emails, making the phone calls, mailing the postcards, as we at Sound Money Defense League and Money Metals make it very easy to do. Yeah. By signing up for our list, we give you all of the information, the key members of the committee, we give you their contact information. We even, in many cases, write out pre-written messages to make it very easy for people to participate in these battles.
Yeah, it's really a fantastic grassroots-driven legislative strategy, and it's very, very effective. So speaking of effective, there was a pretty big victory in Wyoming I guess it was last week, technically. Tell us about what you got passed and what's been signed into law in Wyoming. Or it was signed into law. It was allowed to go into law.
And it was actually this week. It was late Monday night.
Was it Monday? Okay.
Late Monday night, we received word that the Governor Gordon of Wyoming was going to let Senate File 96 become law without his signature. So little backstory on that. In some states, if a governor does not act within a certain amount of time, the bill becomes law without their signature. In other states, if a governor does not act within a certain amount of time, that is considered a pocket veto. He puts the bill in his pocket, he sits on it, and the bill dies. That varies from state to state depending on the state's constitution. But in Wyoming's case, if the legislature passes legislation that the governor does not act on, meaning he does not affirmatively veto, after a certain amount of days, that bill becomes law, whether the governor signs it or not. In this case, Governor Gordon actually has a bit of a bone to pick with gold and silver, having released a 2-page letter first announcing that he was going to let the bill go into law without his signature, and then releasing a 2-page letter saying that the people arguing for this didn't make sense, that gold is not a good investment because the only way you can make money on it is to sell it at a higher value. And he made sure to let the legislature know that if they had even dreamt about asking for a larger appropriation, more than the $10 million that the Wyoming legislature approved, that he would have vetoed it. So he's already setting the stage for a future where the Wyoming legislature could very well decide, wait, we want more than $10 million, which is what this bill did. And there's a collision course now setting into play between the legislature and the governor, should the legislature decide to increase their physical gold holdings through legislative action. But of course, we're talking about in the future. The state of play right now is incredible that Wyoming this week passed this legislation enacting a $10 million stockpile, a gold reserve for the state stored securely in the state. And Wyoming is just one of many. As we know, Utah right now currently owns just under $50 million worth of physical gold in their state. Ohio, it's paper gold. It's not the physical asset, but Ohio has exposure to gold in their teacher and their firefighter and their police pension fund. That's about $1 billion worth of what they're holding there in exposure to gold. Mm-hmm. And Tennessee too has affirmatively passed legislation to empower their state treasurer to invest in physical gold. So, we hear when we think about the macro state of the world right now, there's a lot of talk about de-dollarization. There's a lot of talk about BRICS countries. There's a lot of talk about gold-backed currencies. And yes, of course, this is a trend that should be examined on the global level. But if you look inward and you zoom in a little closer, you'll find that it's not just adversaries of the United States. United States themselves are actively de-dollarizing. They're saying we have too much exposure to dollar-denominated debt, much of which has real negative rates of return because of the high inflation rate. So states themselves are saying, wait, it's not that the United States federal government sanctioned us. It's not that the United States government is kicking us out of SWIFT systems, but I'm looking around, states are looking around just like every country in the world and saying, wow, the Federal Reserve note is highly politicized. And at a whim, politicians could decide to cut me off of the global financial mechanism. So maybe we need a money without counterparty risk, a money that is immune or at least acts as a hedge against inflation, money that can be politicized or perverted to fight wars across the world or to grow a bloated bureaucracy. So states themselves, right, are stockpiling gold. They're seeing the value in gold as a piece of their portfolio on their balance sheet, and also as a sound money hedge, with the understanding that paper money on a long enough timeline, the survival rate of all paper money drops to zero. There is no paper money that has succeeded forever. Every single experiment in paper money has failed, and states are mitigating themselves against that risk.
Yeah, absolutely. Just a couple of weeks ago, President Trump ordered the U.S. Mint to quit creating pennies. And this really is a kind of a microcosm, or I guess more a symptom is a better word for it, of what the government has done to our money. The penny has become so worthless, it's not even worth having them anymore, right? So, and I actually I looked up the math on it. If you go back to the 1970s when I was a kid, I used to take a penny and put it in a gumball machine and I'd get me a little handful of gumballs. That would cost 8 cents today. So you can see just that from that, the impact that they're having on the money. Of course you want to hold gold. If you're going to hold money long term, you don't want to hold dollars when you're losing, 3, 4, 5%. And that's the official number every single year. So when the governor of Wyoming says it doesn't make sense, it's like, what planet is he even living on to make a crazy statement like that?
Absolutely. And honestly, it's not just the governor of Wyoming, I'm sad to say. To be sure, there are treasurers' offices and governors across the country who are supportive of sound money. But there are other states where treasurers and governors are actively against this. In the case of Governor Gordon being one, in the case of, for example, we actually in Wyoming introduced a legislation to do something like this, something that would have created a gold reserve for the state, and that was back in 2019, shortly after the passage of the original Wyoming Legal Tender Act that we helped pass in 2018. And, back then when gold was $1,200 an ounce, we were laughed out of rooms. There were state treasurers and people in these Department of Revenues and Department of Finances in the state laughing at us. Why would we do this? This is a ridiculous wingnut thing. The government doesn't need to own gold. The government is, we're chasing returns, doing this and that. So to own gold would be to misallocate our funds. And look at them now. With gold approaching $3,000 an ounce, these people had a fiduciary duty to their state, to the people of their state, and they completely missed an opportunity to not only protect the state from inflation, but to have the state's balance sheet grow because of the immense growth when priced in dollars that the price of gold has experienced. So there's a lot of blaming that can happen if we wanted to go state to state and look at these legislators that scoffed or chose to ignore or just simply chose to vote down on these policies. But that may have been the case when we were just getting started 8 or 9 years ago. That's not the case anymore, where legislators themselves are the ones reaching out to me saying, hey, I heard what you did in Wyoming or in Tennessee or in Wisconsin, and I want to bring that to our state. How can we do that? So the entire approach, the psychology around sound money legislation, like policies that affect sound money, but also an understanding of what money is and asking those questions for the first time in maybe decades about what is money, what makes a good money, what kind of properties do I want my money ideally to have? Right. And those are questions that are now being asked in ways and with frequency that they haven't been prior to this moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I have to point out that so many of these people who are the scoffers, these treasurers who turn their nose up, they're the same ones that are overseeing state pension systems that are bankrupt. So, their performance review isn't necessarily so great. So Wyoming, that was a big win. What are some other states where you're seeing some progress and you think, hey, we've got some legislation here that might be passed? Where are some optimism and some things that are moving forward? And in those states, how can people help push them forward?
I think there are several really exciting prospects for the passage of sound money legislation here in 2025 moving forward. Again, we already talked about Wyoming having already passed that. On that same issue, on the gold reserve issue, more and more states are considering this in ways that they haven't previously. And the passage of Wyoming's only further incentivizes and encourages states to move forward with this. Right. North Dakota currently is actively considering legislation just like this. In Wyoming's case, Wyoming's bill called for $10 million across state funds. In North Dakota's case, they call for 1% of all state funds, which actually turns out to be a little bit above $10 million anyway. So the numbers are close. But North Dakota is considering this legislation. And we had a great hearing there 2 weeks ago where the treasurer came out and said, yes, we can absorb a 1% hit. We haven't done this before. The reason is largely because we haven't been asked to, but this is a good idea. I'm not against the idea. So in North Dakota, it's very promising. And honestly, North Dakota is starting to blossom as a sound money state in the sense that not only are they considering this reserves bill, and not only do they not have a state sales tax, so there is no sales tax on the purchase of metals, but they're actively at this very moment considering legislation to eliminate all tax liability on the metals as well. Primarily, that would affect capital gains tax, people that would be subject to capital gains tax in the state if they enjoyed a gain. But as we know, sales tax and capital gains tax are the two primary taxes that impede use as money for gold and silver on the state level, and then the federal capital gains tax as well. So North Dakota is actively considering multiple pieces of sound money legislation. Montana is as well. They're not considering a reserve right now, but they are considering removing all taxes of the metals. In Maine, there was the a policy drama of the year 2 years ago. You might remember that, Mike. It was a total novella with backroom dealings and a true struggle of power between Maine Democrats and the members of the party. And ultimately, a bill to end the sales tax on purchases of precious metals in Maine was killed by one vote. It failed by one vote last year, or excuse me, 2 years ago. This year, the bill has been reintroduced. We had a great hearing before the taxation committee last week. I flew out to Augusta, Maine to participate in that hearing. And it looks like we have support there that we didn't have before. Good. Unfortunately, a lot of times, and it shouldn't be this way, but a lot of times sound money policy happens along party lines. In cases like New Jersey, for example, that's obviously not true. In Wisconsin, that's not true. We've had success in chambers in places like Hawaii. So it's not entirely like that. But in the case of Maine, it tended to be a party line vote. However, this year, after years now of talking to members of Democratic leadership, key members of the committees, Democrats in Maine, we've found that we have more support. People are more understanding. And I think a big part of it, too, is we have started tailoring the argument, at least in Maine, to highlight the fact that gold and silver it's not an asset bought by the wealthy fat cats. Right. If Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos wants to buy gold or silver, they're not walking into their local coin shop. They're probably going to their app, their E-Trade or their Schwab app, and buying it electronically. There are tax advantaged ways to do this and electronic ways to do this that the wealthy have access to. But people of low means, people of more humble means, these are people who don't necessarily know what a Roth IRA is, who don't necessarily know what a required distribution is, but they do know what gold and silver is. And so to impose a sales tax on these people who simply want to preserve some of their wealth is regressive in that it affects the least fortunate among them financially. But it's also generally bad public policy. Maine, for example, is surrounded by states that have passed pro-sound money legislation or have policies that promote sound money or at least don't impose regulations on sound money. So Maine is another great example. Kentucky is a great example where bills are being introduced to eliminate the sales tax, to create a reserve, and to sue the governor. You might remember from last year another great drama that unfolded on the sound money policy front, where the legislature in Kentucky passed legislation to remove sales tax on purchases of precious metals. And then the governor said, I don't care. I will unconstitutionally veto this one item in the bill, despite the attorney general coming out and saying that veto is unconstitutional. It is not valid. And the governor said, despite that, he directed the agencies to continue collecting the tax upon penalty or with penalty of legal action or financial penalties for not complying. Right. So this year in Kentucky, we reintroduced the sales tax. We're going to repeal the bill we passed last year and reenact it. Other legislation to create gold reserves for the state, and other legislation that incentivizes taxpayers to sue the governor and his offices for wrongful payment of taxes. Yeah. So there's, on the sound money front in Kentucky, there's a lot of exciting energy there. In Alabama, there's a bill to reestablish or reaffirm gold and silver as legal tender for voluntary use. Alabama has long been a sound money state, having passed now 3 pieces of sound money legislation since 2019. So we're very hopeful across the board, be it taxes, be it reserves, be it legal tender status, whatever it is, there's so much more excitement around these pieces of legislation. And I think a big part of that is the work the Sound Money Defense League is doing with the backing and help of Money Metals Exchange. But a big part of it is introducing a way for the grassroots to really get involved in a way that makes it easy for them, in a way that lets them take control and really take ownership over this issue in a way that affects their lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think that's an important thing to emphasize, that really human action is the key to all of this. We can help facilitate policy changes. We can make a better playing field. We can take down the barriers that help maintain this Federal Reserve monopoly on money. But ultimately, it's up to people. We need people to first get involved at their state level and find out, what bills are being introduced, and make those phone calls, send those emails. And again, the Sound Money Defense League facilitates that, and that's fantastic. And then once those barriers are dropped, people need to start using gold and silver, start buying it, start investing in it, take advantage of that better playing field. And, it's interesting because there's a law, quote unquote law, that is called Gresham's law. And it's the idea that bad money drives out good money in an economy. And we saw this when the federal government took the silver out of quarters and dimes and half dollars, silver dollars. And what happened is that people hoard that good money because it increases in value, and then they spend the garbage money. I think we could actually reverse that Gresham if people started using sound money and started ignoring the Federal Reserve notes that are devaluing in their bank account and their wallets every single day. So I really want to emphasize that aspect of human action to folks who are listening. As you have these policies put into place, take advantage of them and use them. And hopefully as states, as they have the opportunity to expand and build gold and silver reserves, hopefully they'll see the value of that and then expand that as we move. And another point that I think it's important to make for folks that are listening is that that of the kind of step-by-step and plank-by-plank strategy that is going on in places like Alabama and Utah, where we see these smaller steps that build on each other. So in Alabama, first they repealed the sales tax, and then last year they got rid of the state capital gains tax, and this year there's new legislation to build on top of that. And people sometimes get discouraged because they want to see, let's do it all in this one bill, and that's not necessarily the best approach. And that's one of the things I really appreciate about the way that you've approached this, is that you're willing to take those smaller victories and then build on them over time. And that's really important. So good job on the strategy. So when we get to the end, we'll let people know how they can get involved with that. But before we close out the show, I want to talk about something that's going on the national level, and that actually does involve gold reserves. We're talking about states that are establishing gold reserves, and that's fantastic. The U.S. government, the Treasury Department, has gold reserves, or so we think, in Fort Knox. The U.S. actually, on paper, has the largest gold reserves in the entire world, over 8,000 tons of gold. But there have been issues and questions about is the gold really there? Has the auditing process really been up to par? And you have gotten involved in that issue, and all of a sudden there seems to be some momentum in that direction. Can you talk a little bit about auditing the Fort Knox gold?
Absolutely. So this is actually an issue that the Sound Money Defense League has been a participant in for as long as our existence. So more than a decade now, we have championed this idea of auditing America's gold. There are very legitimate, credible questions, being posed by very credible people about the condition and the status of America's gold holdings. To that end, as far as what we've done, we worked in 2019 and in 2021 with Congressman Alex Mooney from West Virginia on the Gold Reserve Transparency Act. This was a template that we created building on Dr. Ron Paul's former bill, I believe from the 90s. We took that bill and we beefed it up. We improved it in places where it needed to be improved. And we created a bill that truly calls for a proper audit of America's gold holdings, something that hasn't happened credibly or comprehensively since at least the 70s. And even then, you could argue that that was a made-for-TV movie. This is a theatric showing where they bring in a couple members of Congress and the media. They choose pre-selected bars out of pre-approved boxes. They show them in front of the camera, and then they go on with their day, believing or concluding that all of the gold is there. But that's not what we're looking for. There was not, despite all that theatric, there was not a single assaying. There was not a weighing. There was not a serial number. There was not a serial number matching. This was not in any way a true audit, the way private depositories would be subject to. So this bill that we have with Congressman Mooney previously, was a great bill that created a great template, but any bill moving forward that is reintroduced needs to go further because, of course, it's important we need to physically inventory the bars. We need to make sure they're all there. But on top of that, you also need a full accounting of the gold. Any transaction that America's gold has been involved in for the last several decades, right? If that gold is there, more interesting than whether or not the gold is physically there is who owns it. Does the United States own it? If so, has it been swapped or leased or pledged or otherwise encumbered or entangled in another financial transaction? Does the IMF own it? The Bank of International Settlements, the World Bank, the Vatican even? There are so many legitimate questions surrounding gold holdings. Of course, there's seals. There are questions about whether the seals have been broken, whether the gold itself has been physically moved. And of course, Jan Nieuwenhuis is a gold analyst for Money Metals who has spent the last several years on this very topic. And so it's important. He wrote this great piece recently that was on Money Metals about making sure that President Trump, while we appreciate his newfound interest, he cannot be fooled by one of these fake audits like what happened in the 70s. And us as supporters of sound money and people who are sincerely interested in knowing what's behind those vault doors, we cannot suffice for even Trump's word saying the gold is all there. Don't worry, I've seen it. Because at this point, there's so much mystery and questions surrounding this that no amount of, hey, buddy, don't worry, it's there. I promise, I've seen it, will suffice from President Trump or otherwise. Right. I think another big thing about the gold, whether or not it's there and then questions on claims of the gold, is that the gold itself is probably not very high quality. A lot of that gold in America's vaults are coin bars. These are coins that were seized and then melted down into giant bars that are largely impure. These are 90 to 92% impure. They're not meeting the global standards for gold. They're useless in the global market. They're not liquid. So any bill that comes forward in the future would be wise to include a purity requirement, a refining process over the next couple of years so that America's gold is of high quality. And in the case of America ever wanting to sell it or use it or pledge it or reestablish a money based in it, they would know they have high quality premium gold. So, there are a ton of questions around this. And the truth is, bars can sit in the same spot and change owners. There are people in this space who are saying, well, look, the America has done these little funny audits, as I like to call them, for years. But that is an audit of the seal, not of the asset within the box. If we were just auditing seals, then what's the point in even opening the vault door? The point is to audit the actual asset within the box. So there are people in the space clamoring over, this gold has been audited credibly for many years, and that is absolutely not the case. Auditing the seals is not the same as auditing the metals, the assets purportedly in the box. And so we're very excited that Donald Trump, President Trump, and Elon Musk and Senators Ron Paul and Mike Lee have joined in the fray, have talked about how it's important that America know what's inside its vaults. This is our gold. As American taxpayers, that gold belongs to us, and we have a right to know that it's there and what quality it's in and who lays claim to it. So it's an exciting time on this audit issue, and I think that whether there's a lot of talk about revaluing gold to $8,000 an ounce, $10,000 an ounce, whatever it is. And on the other side, there's a lot of talk. You have a sitting congresswoman talking about selling America's gold holdings to buy Bitcoin. But the truth is, whether you want to revalue the asset so as to remonetize America's balance sheet, or if you want to remonetize the asset so that you can then sell it to pay down America's debt, whatever your goals are, the first step has to be a full and comprehensive audit. We do not know what's in there. We cannot base a future money off of questions and mystery. We have to know what's in those vaults.
Yeah, absolutely. I have an accounting background, and so I know a little bit about auditing processes. And what blows my mind, again, there are these, I can't think of any other word. It's not a very kind word, but government shills that say, oh, no, it's been audited. We don't need to audit it again, blah, blah, blah. This is like any standard auditing program is ongoing, and it's comprehensive, and there's multiple layers to it. You don't just go, look at it one time and then say everything's fine.
And then 20 years later, you're like, no, we don't need that. We looked 20 years ago. It's still there. We're good.
Right.
It's incomprehensible.
Yeah. The assumption in auditing always is that there's a problem. Right. And you're seeking to prove that there's not. And there's this weird backward mindset that, everything's fine and it's incumbent on you to prove why we need to. That's just not how accounting and auditing is done in the private sector. Why do you think that there is this resistance to actually doing an audit? I mean, in my view, even if you're like skeptical, you think, all the gold's there, I'm sure everything's fine. What is the problem with going to check and look? Why is there this resistance?
I think for some people, the resistance stems from a reflexive acceptance of anything the government says. So if a government audit says that this is the case, then this is the case. And these people aren't willing to do any second order thinking or anything past what is put in their face. So I think that's part of it. I think that another reason for why someone might be against it is the reality that this could potentially expose that the United States emperor has no clothes.
Yeah,
it's possible. And whether or not it's there, I don't know. I have a hard time foreseeing a situation where Trump would allow that to happen, that the doors to be opened on camera and it to be exposed, that if there isn't any gold there, that be exposed. But I think that that's a very real concern among people who are hesitant about whether or not we should open the vault doors.
Yeah.
But like I mentioned, at this point, the toothpaste is out of the tube. The public confidence in the dollar and the American economy is shaking. You've done great reporting on the state of the American consumer, drowning in credit card debt. If this country were to reestablish itself as a global leader, then opening those vault doors and showing that the sound money is in fact there, that America holds the greatest, largest stockpile of the greatest monetary asset that has ever existed. If they open the doors and that is proven, then this could usher in a new age of public confidence in America's money, a complete pivot away from deficit spending and hyper Keynesianism to a more sound money or Austrian or free market perspective. So there are benefits to opening these doors. It's not all bad, but whether it's good or bad for the bankers or the financiers or even the people of America, globally, this information has to come out. There are countries all over the world, Americans here in the States, that are making decisions based on this information. And that information has to come out and has to come out honestly. And then from there, when the dust settles, America can continue its path to, continuing to make America great again and can do global dominance and can reestablish the U.S. Federal Reserve note as a strong currency worldwide. Or they'll open those doors and they'll find that what was purported to be there is not there. And the fallout then would be probably tremendous. There's implications on gold prices, implications on gold miners, the entire industry. So certainly there are a myriad of possibilities that come from opening that door, literally opening that vault door. But one of sound money's most best qualities is its honesty. Its inability to be counterfeited, or rather the difficulty for it to be counterfeited. A monetary system based in gold or sound money is one that's built in honest weights and measures. That's entirely the point. So answering these questions is crucial.
Yeah, very, very well said. I really appreciate that. So where can folks go to find out about the work that is going on over at the Sound Money Defense League, and even maybe get involved in their own state to find out maybe what legislation is pending in their states, and maybe get involved in the grassroots work of getting this stuff passed?
So you can find us at soundmoneydefense.org. You can find my contact information, my Twitter's on there. If you live in one of these states where there are sound money policies that need to come and that need to happen in your state, please feel free to reach out. If you're looking for where your state ranks among the 50 states, on Money Metals Exchange's website, they host something that we publish every year called the Sound Money Index, where we rank all 50 states by their sound money policies. So I encourage everyone to check that out on Money Metals' website. And if you see that your state is one of the states towards the bottom, please feel free to reach out. There have been a number of projects that have been successfully passed that began with someone in the state reaching out and saying, hey, I would like to bring this to my state. What can we do?
Yeah.
So, and then of course, I encourage everyone to please sign up for our list on the Sound Money Defense League site. We ask for your email address and your zip code. The reason for that is because in our system, we segment every email by zip code so that when there is a legislative battle happening in your state, you will receive key information of crucial key members, the hearing times, the committee, the contact information, all of that. And all of that is dependent on what state you're in. So, for example, we wouldn't send you action alerts for legislation happening in Tennessee if you live in Montana. So we're very direct. We make it very easy to participate. We encourage everyone to sign up for that list there.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's your action item, listeners. Go get on that email list, and you're not going to get spammed with a bunch of stuff. I mean, this is good information that you're going to want to have that you can take action on and make your state and ultimately the entire United States a place of sound money. And it's really what we need. It's like you said, it's honest money. And if nothing else, if you're a free market person, you say, I believe in free markets, there's nothing more important to a free market economy than having a free market in money and having sound, honest money. So I really, really appreciate the work that you're doing and the strategies that you've taken. It's effective, and appreciate you taking the time out of your busy day during legislative session to chat a little bit about what's going on. And hopefully we can get back together here in a couple of months and talk about some more victories on the sound money front.
That sounds great, Mike. Thank you very much for having me on. It's always good talking to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks again.
As you can tell, sound money advocacy is a key missional aspect of Money Metals. We will continue to do what we can to lead the way when it comes to this worthy cause, and we urge you to take action when called upon. The impact of grassroots has been and will continue to be instrumental in achieving more and more victories on this important legislative front. Well, that will do it for this week. Be sure to check back next Friday for next weekly Market Wrap podcast. And remember to tune in as well to the Money Metals Midweek Memo hosted by Mike Meharry. To listen to any of our audio programs, just go to moneymetals.com/podcasts or find those on whatever podcast platform you prefer. Until next time, this has been Mike Gleason with Money Metals Exchange. Thanks for listening and have a wonderful weekend, everybody.
Thank you for joining us for this week's Money Metals podcast. Be sure to come back next week. And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast through iTunes. For answers to all of your questions, or to discreetly and securely buy or sell gold or silver coins, bars, and rounds, call 1-800-800-1865 or visit www.moneymetals.com. Our knowledgeable and no-pressure specialists are standing by to answer your call during business hours, Monday through Saturday. Or you can lock in your order online, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Again, visit us at www.moneymetals.com or call 1-800-800-1865.